And all the greenhouse gas pollution would be below you. We're still putting 162 million tons into it every single day. And the accumulated amount is now trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth. That's what's boiling the oceans, creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs and sucking the moisture out of the land and creating the droughts and melting the ice and raising the sea level and causing these waves of climate refugees predicted to reach 1 billion in this century. Look at the xenophobia and political authoritarian trends that have come from just a few million refugees. What about 1 billion? We would lose our capacity for self-governance on this world.
Men kontentan är att Al Gore sitter i Davos och skriker att klimatförändringarna motsvarar vad han sa, Hiroshima-bomber.
Att sitta och skrika på den här rösten, han är desperat på att inte längre någon knappt tror på honom. Och varför ska man göra det? För allt han har sagt är ju falskt. Det har inte uppfyllts. Han lever i teorin. Matematiska modeller som är felaktiga.
Jo, men han klingar sig fast vid de pengar han har tjänat på det här.
Ja, det är det va? Exakt, han vill försöka rättfärdiga att han har tjänat.
Nu börjar ju folk från vetenskapen dra i kranen och säga Al Gore, du får inga mer pengar.
Jag bara väntar på att folk i större utsträckning ska vakna och fatta liksom att systemet är sjukt, det är korrupt. Och det går ut på att mjölka dig på pengar och under tiden hålla dig under skräck, under hot, under tyranni. Det är så det ser ut.
Ja, tyvärr är det så.
Adam, du sa här för en stund sedan att det här med klimatförändringarna är bluff. Kan du utveckla det?
Ja, vi har ju under årtionden väntat på undergången. Vi fick ju höra redan från Al Gore på 90-talet att isarna skulle vara borta vid det här laget och att alla isbjörnar skulle vara så gott som utdöda. Det här har ju inte skett, men ändå väntar vi hela tiden på att undergången ska komma. Och det här är ganska talande för klimatdebatten i största allmänhet, för det är ju en form av en slags domedagssekt. Och precis som alla andra domedagssekter så har man först satt ett datum som sedan kommer och så har inte profetian infriats och då måste man skjuta fram datumet. Men det börjar bli allt mer synligt för vanliga människor att det här med klimatförändringar inte är så som vetenskapen och våra makthavare säger.
Klimatförändringarna sker här och nu och det är bråttom. Vi behöver handling nu för att Sverige ska lyckas med sin del av klimatomställningen. Klimatförändringarna är skapade av mänsklig aktivitet och hotar samhällen världen över. Det är bråttom för hela världen att börja ställa om sina samhällen och börja minska sina utsläpp. Och det bekräftades av framgångarna på klimattoppmötet i Dubai. Och det bekräftas inte minst av forskare och IPCCs klimatrapporter. Men det är inte bara bråttom att ställa om samhället för att undvika temperaturökningar och extremväder. Det här är också en fråga om svenskt välstånd och om Sveriges position som industriland. Det är självklart väldigt oroväckande att ett så stort och viktigt land som USA lämnar Parisavtalet igen. Men den här gången är både Sverige och EU väl förberedda och vi kommer se till att nyttja varje tillfälle vi kan för att olika delar av klimatarbetet ska fortsätta.
Vad ska egentligen motivera Sverige och de svenska medborgarna att jobba med klimatfrågor om de som släpper ut mest bara struntar i det?
Det är en jättebra fråga. Jag menar ju att Sverige allt för länge har fokuserat för lite på hur vi kan se till att stora utsläppare minskar sina utsläpp. Och det är ett arbete vi nu växlar upp. Och om man exempelvis tittar på vad som händer i USA så tror jag en viktig del om man jämför med Sverige är att Sverige har ju byggt upp vår industri och våra företag och vår ekonomi på att också exportera rena varor och rena tjänster. Till skillnad från ett land som USA som nu växer sin ekonomi genom att utöka sin fossila export.
In Earth's atmosphere, there are powerful forces at work, and perhaps the most powerful of all are clouds.
CO2 is quite unimportant in controlling the Earth's climate. What is important is clouds. Clouds don't absorb any energy at all. They simply reflect all of the sunlight back out into space. Big, bright, white clouds. If you look at the Earth, you see lots and lots of them, and they vary dramatically from one day to the next. That is hundreds of times more powerful than the trivial effects of CO2.
But what controls the number and density of clouds on Earth? Professor Henrik Svensmark from the Danish National Space Institute is in Jerusalem with the astrophysicist Nir Shaviv. Together they've been exploring cloud variation and its effect on climate. And strangely, they've found a link between clouds and exploding supernovae far off in our galaxy.
When we have big stars, they don't live very long. Relatively only maybe a few million years, up to 40 million years. But they end their life in a huge explosion, which we call the supernova.
An exploding supernova sends out vast quantities of debris, tiny charged subatomic particles known as cosmic rays, traveling almost at the speed of light. And as they hit Earth, they develop into seeds which attract water vapor and form clouds. As our solar system orbits the galaxy over millions of years, it passes through the galaxy's spiral arms, dense clusters of stars. As it does, we are exposed to more or less cloud-forming cosmic rays, and this corresponds to historic temperature changes on Earth.
The really mind-boggling thing is that using geology, you can reconstruct the climate on Earth over the past billion years, and you can reconstruct our galactic journey, and both tell the same story.
But what about temperature change on shorter timescales? The Sun, our source of heat and light, a seething mass of gigantic magnetic storms, which vary in strength and number over time, and which affect Earth directly and indirectly. When it is very active, the Sun sends giant gusts of solar wind through the solar system. The solar wind warms us indirectly by acting as a barrier, limiting the number of cloud-forming cosmic rays reaching Earth.
So from the Sun, we have the solar wind. It carries the Sun's magnetic field out to a large distance, and it works like a shield against cosmic rays.
That when the Sun is more active, you have a stronger solar wind, you have less cosmic rays reaching the inner solar system and reaching the atmosphere, and the clouds which are then formed are less white. They reflect less of the sunlight, which means that it's going to be warmer here on Earth.
Here is a proxy reconstruction of ocean temperatures over thousands of years. And here is one of solar activity over the same period. What is causing the ocean temperature to change is clearly variations in solar activity.
Because IPCC is determined to go on a narrative that only CO2 can drive the climate system, they turn off the sun essentially, right? Because the sun is just a background thing for them, that it doesn't do anything.
Astrophysicist Willie Soon decided to look again at the rural temperature record for the past 150 years. Then he looked at a record of changes in solar activity over the same period. To Dr. Soon, it was obvious that it was the sun, not CO2, that was driving temperature.
As of 2023, IPCC says is that the sun have absolutely zero chance to explain the changes of the climate system on a broad scale, let's say global warming or northern hemisphere. We say no. We can easily demonstrate the sun can explain all of it. There's zero for the CO2, 100% for the sun. How's that?
Why are these and other studies never reported in the mainstream media? And if climate change is natural, what are we to make of the alleged terrifying increase in extreme weather events? Of the heat waves and hurricanes, of forest fires, droughts and the rest?
Det som glädjer kommunalrådet är att arbetet med att bygga 3 meter höga skyddsvallar runt Falsterbonäset i Skåne nu kommer igång. När allt är klart om cirka 10 år kommer näset att ramas in av drygt 2 mil vallar och murar som ska skydda bostäder, infrastruktur och värdefull natur när havsnivån stiger över den normala, som senast skedde när stormen Babette drog in i slutet på oktober.
Det är klart att med de här tillfälliga havsnivåhöjningarna och stormar så kommer vi att utmanas.
Men tror du 3 meter kommer att räcka?
Som det ser ut idag så tror jag att vi kommer att klara oss i några decennier framöver. Ja, det tror jag.
People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
If somebody says in the news this is the warmest day since 1980 or something, well, you can look up the temperature records and see for yourself whether it was in fact warmer in the 1930s, as it often is.
US temperature records are the best in the world. And here is the official US government record of heat waves in the US over the past century. It shows very clearly that the 1930s were far more prone to heat waves than we are today. Not only were there more heat waves in the 1930s, the heat waves then were much hotter than those of today. Likewise, official figures show that the number of hot days in the US has markedly declined.
The United States was much hotter in the 1930s. North Dakota reached 121 degrees. South Dakota was 120 degrees. Wisconsin was 114 degrees. These sort of temperatures are just completely out of range of anything people experience now.
A common mistake is to suppose that higher average temperature will mean more hot weather, but this isn't true. Here again is the Central England temperature record, the longest instrumental temperature record in the world. Summer temperatures over the past 300 to 400 years, since the end of the Little Ice Age, have barely changed at all. It is winter temperatures that have been slightly rising. The Earth's climate has not been getting hotter, it's been getting milder.
That's certainly being observed all over the world. If you look at temperature records, high temperatures are almost unchanged. But cold temperatures at night or during the winter are going up a little bit. Not very much, but you can measure it.
When the average goes up, it's really more due to the coldest temperatures getting warmer. So the temperatures getting milder rather than getting hotter.
What about the increasing number of wildfires we're often told about?
If you look at the actual number of forest fires from satellite observations, the actual number is going down.
Here is an estimate of global wildfires since 1900. It shows a clear decline. And here is a record of areas affected by wildfires in the US. It shows that wildfires were far, far worse in the 1930s.
From 1930s and 1920s, when you have data, the thing was huge. 5 to 10 times bigger than the current level.
How about hurricanes? The US has by far the best record of hurricane activity in the world. Over the past 120 years, there is no overall change. In fact, the trend is slightly down.
When you look at the data for hurricanes, technically tropical cyclones, you see that there is no long-term trend.
How about the rest of the world? Here is a chart of global hurricane activity over the past 40 years.
Hurricanes have been around forever. You know, we've got good proxy records of hurricanes, and there's been no change in their frequency. Even the IPCC admits that.
How about melting ice caps and drought? Here's a satellite record of temperature in Antarctica since the late 1970s. It shows no increase whatsoever. And here is a record of global drought since 1950. There is no observable increase at all. Polar bears are meant to be going extinct, but studies suggest their numbers are growing. The Great Barrier Reef, too, has recently reached record levels.
There's no such thing as a climate emergency happening on this planet now. There's no evidence of one.
Yeah, the extreme weather event story is just absurd. There's no basis to it at all. It's just based on propaganda. The actual data shows the opposite.
I've shown you the official data, the official science. Tell me what I'm denying.
The climate alarm is nonsense. You know, it's a hoax. I've never liked hoax. I think scam is a better word, but I'm willing to live with hoax.
Därefter kom Mostar i Bosnien med 40,5 grader. Enligt Mikael Tjärnström, professor vid meteorologiska institutionen vid Stockholms universitet, så hör de temperaturer som vi ser nu ihop med klimatförändringarna.
Ja, det här hör definitivt ihop med klimatförändringarna och är faktiskt lite intressant därför att det är en av de tydliga signalerna som vi såg redan för 30 år sedan när vi genomförde de första regionala klimatberäkningarna på SMHI. Man kan säga på sätt och vis att ökenområdena söder om Medelhavet hoppar över Medelhavet och hamnar i södra Europa istället. Om en 10-15 år fram i tiden så kommer inte svenskar att åka till Medelhavsområdet för att ligga på stranden och känna på den sköna värmen och de sköna baden, utan det är de som bor där som kommer att ta sig till Sverige och till Norden för att slippa ifrån den fruktansvärda hettan och torkan i södra Europa.
Så här är alltså en avvikelsekarta, temperatur, så hur mycket varmare eller kallare det har varit än normalt.
Gud, det är ju nästan bara vi här i Skandinavien som har haft det kallare.
Absolut, så det är verkligen vi som sticker ut, men annars är det jätterött, vilket betyder att det har varit otroligt varmt för att vara oktober.
Varför?
Det beror på många olika saker. Om man tittar lokal nivå så är det liksom hur vädret är, vad högtrycken går och lågtrycken. Men på global skala så är det havsvattnet som spelar stor roll. Det är jättevarmt i vattnet runt om i världen just nu, vilket i sin tur också påverkar lufttemperaturen. Men sen är det också människans påverkan på klimatet.
Who was the famous gangster asked, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Well, because that's where the money is."
The climate alarm brought funds, and the bigger the supposed threat, the more funds seemed to flow. The publicly funded science establishment now had a direct financial interest in playing up the alarm.
So there's a huge incentive to over-exaggerate or to speak in hyperbole, even if the data doesn't support exactly what you're saying, because that's what brings the funds. I was in that boat. I was someone that was defending climate change as a grad student quite a bit, because the truth is I didn't give it too much thought, but I thought, well, it's getting a ton of attention. It brings a ton of money into the earth sciences. Even if I don't buy all the hyperbole, what's the problem?
By the late 1990s, what had started as an environmental scare story was gaining momentum. Western governments and their senior civil servants were more than willing to address the climate problem. Green taxes were levied, green regulation expanded, and this in turn generated more climate-related jobs and activity.
Take the banking sector, for instance. You say to a banker, we want you to file reports with the Regulatory Commission on how climate change is going to affect your bank. Well, a banker doesn't know anything about this subject, so then they have to commission studies from academics. And of course, the academics are happy to come and tell them, well, it's going to be terrible for your bank. It's going to cause all kinds of problems, and you need to give us money to research this.
Green subsidies and regulation meant there was now money to be made in climate. Renewables firms sprouted. Consultancy firms offered advice on what they called sustainability and climate compliance.
It's a wonderful business opportunity, okay? You want climate, we'll give you climate.
The renewables industry alone now turns over $1 trillion a year, and that's expected to double in the next few years.
What used to be a cottage industry is now blossomed to become a major part of the world economy.
The growth of this climate industry has seen an explosion of highly paid green jobs. Chief sustainability officers, carbon offset advisors, ESG consultants, climate compliance lawyers, and countless others.
Students started to come into our departments as earth science departments with a focus on climate. That never happened before. But they started to look at their career prospects, and they were smart, and they were looking at who's hiring. And the fact of the matter is that everything in the hiring pool had climate somewhere attached to the name.
I started a few years ago seeing programs like a master's degree in climate finance. And I just went, what on earth is climate? I understand what a master's degree in finance is. Well, now you need a university that's going to teach this program. You need professors of climate finance.
Every single school or university or business will have a climate officer or climate officers and a climate program. And you look at any of these institutions or businesses, you will find they all are signed up to it, and anyone who hasn't signed up will come under pressure.
At the last gathering of the publicly funded UN's IPCC, 70,000 delegates flew in from around the world. Government bureaucrats, green NGOs, carbon sequestration consultants, environmental journalists, heads of renewables companies. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Many hundreds of thousands of jobs worldwide now depend on the climate crisis.
You start building this enormous population whose job is to manage the crisis, and also explicitly to make sure that people are alarmed about the crisis, because this whole industry depends on the existence of the crisis.
But therein lies the one great threat to this multi-trillion-dollar industry. All the jobs, all of the funding, are totally dependent on there being a climate crisis.
If CO2 isn't having the huge negative impacts that we claimed it was having originally, how are we going to stay in business? How do we justify our existence if climate change isn't this existential threat that we claimed it was over the last 4 decades or so?
People like me, our careers depend on funding of climate research. This is what I've been doing just about my whole career. This is what the other climate researchers are doing with their whole career. They don't want this to end.
If NASA said global warming's not a problem, where does their funding disappears, right? So they can't say that. I mean, you've got the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. If they said the climate isn't changing, they'd have no reason to exist.
The IPCC has a self-preservation instinct to show that climate change is an existential threat. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to be collecting the money and doing the work in the first place.